Welcome to Literary Analysis with Arren Manuel. Now, today we'll be looking at two short works of Herman Melville. One being Bartleby the Scrivener, A Story of Wall Street, and the second is Benito Sereno. Now, both these works we'll be looking at to see how human perception and knowledge are used to better understand the world around someone. Now, human perception is really crazy, as just like some small details can give you enough information for you to infer something about an object. Take for example a dusty DVD player. When you go in a room and you see something really dusty like that, you can tell that it's not been used for quite a while. And that's just a very small example of human perception, and it can get to really complex things when a lot of details are taken in, especially in very complex situations. And this is something that the main characters in both these works go through. In the story of Bartleby, the narrator is given the employee named Bartleby, and he finds out that Bartleby has a strange behavior of not wanting to do anything, not preferring to rather, and is just trying to figure out what's going on. In the story of Benito Sereno, Captain Delano, our main character, is on this sort of messed up ship that just drifts by his, and he's just trying to figure out what's going on, and the crew's acting all weird. Little did he know, it's because there was just a mutiny on the ship that caused a change in power between the slaves and the masters. So the slaves mutinied and took over. And they're trying to hide that from him, so that gives him that strange environment. Now, knowing that, this leads me to my thesis, which is both these characters go through these strange environments, but they show that everyone has their own perceptions when looking at something, and it's caused by three different factors. One factor is the details they directly perceive from the environment, like what they sense. Two is their prior knowledge coming into the environment. Number three is their past personal experiences coming into the environment that they've gone through from the past. Now, there are definitely shortcomings to human perception. One being, one can be easily deceived through like lies. And this is definitely shown in Benito Sereno. Captain Delano on board the ship had no idea a mutiny happened earlier. So Babo, being essentially the master of the ship now after he was a former slave who led the mutiny, and he became the mastermind behind everything. He orchestrated that the Spaniards of the ship, they were to pretend as if they were still the masters of the slaves, and that they were just a usual slave ship that had gone through some crazy storms that just screwed everything. It just made them all miserable. So, in doing this, he got Benito Sereno and essentially painted him as the captain for Delano to meet. And Babo would just hide, or just stay behind and holding up Benito Sereno and it seemed like he was like the puppet master. Yet, he got Benito Sereno to essentially tell everything to Captain Delano. So Sereno told the whole story, made him seem like he was the captain, and Captain Delano sort of bought it. He could tell that Sereno was really weak, and that he wasn't really fit to be a captain. But at the same time, he saw that everyone else seemed weak, so he knew that something strange was going on, and it might be that Sereno was plotting against him, but it wasn't at all, because his mind was deceived from these lies. His perception was skewed. Now, deception isn't the only thing that can affect human perception negatively. And another thing is just not being able to perceive enough information. Now, I know I was talking about how how crazy the human mind was when that they're just able to perceive like really small details and just make big inferences from it. But there's also the problem when you're looking at really advanced things, such as when the narrator was trying to understand Bartleby. He's not getting enough information from the character. Bartleby just responds with, "I prefer not to," every time he was asked to do anything or asked about any like personal information, because the narrator's really trying hard to figure out what's going on with him. But now we can go to the first point of my thesis. Human perception is different, and one of the factors that can affect one's perception is the details that are actually taken from the environment. Now we can keep going with the story of Bartleby, right? As an employee, Bartleby was placed in the same room as the narrator, who was his boss, so we can easily see him and call him out. But the problem is, as I said, Bartleby just wouldn't do anything. He would just respond with, quote, I would prefer not to," end quote. And this initially shocked the narrator, there's a conflict here because the other employees are just pissed at Bartleby because they just see that this guy is just not even working. Like, I would probably be pretty mad if I just see one of my coworkers not pulling any of their weight. But the narrator, though, instead of firing him, he keeps him and tries to figure out what's going on. And I think a big portion of this is because of the placement of the character. The other employees are just pissed at him because all they hear is, "I would prefer not to." They can just hear him because they can't actually see him. The narrator, though, has actually seen him. So the narrator even says, when he first saw this strange behavior, he looked at Bartleby's face and he said, quote, "Had there been the least uneasiness, anger, impatience, of impertinence in his manner, in other words, had there been anything ordinarily human about him, doubtless I should have violently dismissed him from my premises." End quote. And this, as one can see, he actually saw the face of Bartleby and saw that there was just something odd about it. He was calm, he was completely collected, and he just seemed really depressed. And he noticed that something might be going on with him. And that's the other detail he perceived that the other co-workers haven't seen. And that made him want to understand. It gave him a different perception of Bartleby. Now moving on to the next point of my thesis is the second factor that can affect one's perception, and that is prior knowledge. Now moving on to the story Benito Sereno. Captain Delano at the time, he was a little racist because he had prior knowledge that slaves were generally black and their masters were generally white. And knowing this, when he got on the ship, he was able to be easily deceived by Babo, as when he was told that Benito Sereno was the captain, he sort of bought it even though he saw that Sereno was clearly weak. And even though Babo was like, it was parallel to a puppet master, controlling Sereno's moves, just holding him up, I feel as if Delano just overlooked this because of his prior knowledge. He knew that Babo was a slave, so he just completely ignored that fact that he was in control. He just wiped that, and that's why he was a little surprised at the end when he sort of found out what was going on. But because of that prior knowledge, his perception on Babo was that he was a slave, and he probably wouldn't be one to take over the ship. Now another interesting example of prior knowledge being used is during the knot scene. When Captain Delano was thrown a knot by an old sailor, he described it in his mind as, quote, "a combination of double bowline knot, treble crown knot, backhanded well knot, knot in and out knot, and jamming knot," end quote. Now this may not pertain too much to the plot, but it does to perception, because to other people who are non-sailors, which may be a lot of the readers, they would just see it as a really complex knot. But Captain Delano, being a sailor, having training with knots, so he's obviously well versed in his types of knots based on this quote. He's able to pick apart the appearance of the knot and changes specific things that he has learned from in the past, like all those knots he has listed. Now, continuing on with my thesis, the last factor that I've listed in changing one's perception towards something is their past experiences that they've gone through personally. Now, going on with the story of Benito Sereno again, Captain Delano, who has obviously gone through captain's training and is a captain himself, he's experienced commanding crews to sail. So upon seeing Benito Sereno so weak, he just looked non-captain-like to him because of his past personal experiences of being a captain. He was sort of comparing himself to him and saw that there was just a discrepancy right there. In fact, Delano even shared a thought that, quote, "The man was an imposter, some low-born adventurer masquerading as an oceanic grandee," end quote. This is an interesting quote, as this is where it shows that he's suspicious of this guy being a captain, yet still sort of buys it. But he makes this inference because of his past experience. He knows how it is, and he couldn't see how this guy could be a captain. Like, he knows that the crew is, everyone on the crew is very miserable, including the Sereno himself, but he was probably thinking that in times like this, wouldn't they need a strong leader? And that just wasn't present in Sereno. Now, additionally, there's also an example of past experiences shown in Bartleby the Scrivener. Reason being, with the narrator, he's had experience with strange employees. Nippers in Turkey, for example, they have like very odd behavior half the day. Turkey's strange behavior starts in the afternoon and Nippers more in the morning, which renders them useless. He even said, quote, "The irritability and consequent nervousness of Nippers were mainly observable in the morning. Turkey's paroxysms only coming on about 12 o'clock. I never had to do with their eccentricities at one time," end quote. So he's used to people being sort of useless at his workplace, yet he still has them because he's found a use for them. Reason being, half the day they were functioning properly. Now, because of this past experience, that's sort of what gave him the perception towards this new employee, Bartleby, that maybe Bartleby has this problem, but he could still be useful. Which he definitely was when he first was hired. Even though he would prefer not to do any other tasks, he still did all the copies that were requested of him, and he seemed to like never even stop working, and that was good. But it's just other simple tasks like proofreading. It's just frustrating that the employee just doesn't want to comply with that. But the narrator, because of this past example or past experience with his other workers, he was willing to just make that sacrifice and try to work with them. In conclusion, we can see that no two people can have the same details they've seen from their environment, past experiences, and prior knowledge to come up with the same exact perception as the next person. They might be similar, but they aren't the same. Now, Herman Melville created these interesting worlds that are really strange, and he put a lot of description in them, so even as a reader, you can see this thesis being held up, as one might have different perceptions on characters that the main character might not have. I definitely did going through Benito Sereno, as I was also trying to put together what is happening, and it didn't always align with what Captain Delano thought was happening. But anyway, as one can see, perception is always different, based on a lot of factors, and there's no two perceptions the same. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have enjoyed my essay. This has been Literature Analysis with Arren D. Manuel. Peace.